Good morning. Thank you for being here with us this morning and for letting us take some time to talk with you about English learners. I'm Valerie Beard. I'm the English Learner Specialist with the department.
And I'm Dietrich. I'm the EL and Migrant Ed Coordinator. And I see you all have candy now, so your blood sugar's up a little bit. We're not right before lunch, but we are the before lunch presentation. So we understand if your blood sugar is getting a little low. So we're going to start off here by building some background on ELs. Let me back up though and say, anything we present on today is very general, but if there's anything that you would like us to drill down on specifically, how to do an ILP, WIDA, what are those training looks like, how should I roll out the standards, sheltered instruction, observational protocol, or SIOP, or if students with disabilities and ELs who are dual identified, please feel free to email either Valerie or myself, and we'd be happy to schedule a time where our team would come in and present to your staff, or we would be sure to invite you to any trainings that we have across the state that we speak at. So just some background without Googling, looking at you, Stephanie. So without Googling any of these terms, just want to see what your background knowledge on ELs is. Just do a little bit of table talk with your partners really quickly and see how many of the 6 terms you can get. We have FEP, LEP, LTEL, ILP, WAPT, and Access. So talk to your partners real quick and give you about 2 or 3 minutes and see how many of the 6 you can get. Okay. Sounds like we have pretty much gone through the whole list here. So this is important to model for your teachers. For your English learners, it's important that they don't sit there and receive all of their information throughout the whole day. Language is not learned in that manner. Language is learned when you get to interact and make mistakes and mess it up, quite frankly. So if your ELs don't have multiple opportunities, just as this is just a small snippet, but throughout your class and throughout your activities to be able to speak and produce academic English, they're really not going to get to grow from that 1 to a 4 and then that 4 to a 5. So please make sure that in your classrooms when you're walking through doing observations that you're seeing your ELs getting to produce language. So the first one, FEP, who's got that one? You can just shout it out.
Anyone?
Fluent.
That's the F.
English proficient. Good. So that's a student that would test a 5.0 or above on WIDA Access. They are FEP or fluent English proficient. So the second one would be?
Low? No. Almost. Limited.
Limited English proficient. Third one, LTEL. This is kind of a new one. Long-term English learner. So long-term English learner, which is the first time it's appeared in ESSA, the upcoming federal regulations for ELs. Now we're going to designate ELs who have not reached FEP status within 5 years. So schools are actually going to have to start reporting that to the state departments of ed across the country as part of ESSA. So you're going to have to break your EL subgroup data down into those who have not reached fluent English proficiency within 5 years. ILP, that one's pretty easy. Individual learning plan, good. WAPT.
Does anyone know what this is, even if you don't know what the letters stand for?
It's the qualification exam.
Exactly.
It's the screener exam, perfect. So it's the WIDA Access Placement Test, which just as a side note, we are keeping that as our screener again for this year. WIDA is trying to charge for the actual screener and we're not going to let them, so we're holding off on that for another year. And the last one, Access. Perfect. So it is the annual exam that you'll give to your students, and that'll give you the 1.0 to 6.0 score for your students. One last one before we get on to the presentation. What's the difference between 250 and 1950? Maybe we've got some math people in here. Is there a ratio? Tommy's trying to figure out if it's a riddle. Any guesses? We were both EL teachers, so we have good wait time. While you're processing the receptive language, considering the productive language. So 250 would be about the maximum average of minutes you could expect to get English language development for an EL if you're doing sort of a traditional pull-out model where the student just gets some worksheet help or vocab help for a couple minutes every day. That's about the average per week that we see. However, the 1950 is if you are embedding your content and English language development in your content and making it accessible for your English learner, that's about the number of minutes every week that you can get for English language development. So you can see really on our next slide, when we say every teacher is a language teacher, if you sort of absorb that mentality and make that your mantra going forward, that even though you teach middle school math, you actually do teach language as part of your content area, which anyone who's seen iStep now, it's not necessarily a math test, it's an English test measuring your math knowledge as well. So if you can imagine the roadblock that can throw up for an English learner who's not proficient. So we want every teacher to really take that ownership and be a language teacher. So if you are the content area teacher and you're teaching English language as part of your content, 1,950 minutes is going to get us a lot farther than 250.
We're going to share with you our 2015 to 2016 WIDA Access data for the state. As we mentioned, Access is the assessment that's given every year, and it's our most comprehensive English language proficiency measure. So you can see this was the test that was given January, February last year, and statewide you can see that we had almost over 25% of our students reach level 5.0 to 6.0, which means they exited and were reclassified as fluent English proficient. But then you can see the bulk of our students fall in that level 3 to level 4 area. And that's really important to know because a lot of times when we have a level 1 student move in, they are the ones that we see the need, and it's kind of a glaring need. You see them and you know they need support because they are not able to function maybe in the classroom at all. But it's important to know that a lot of our students hit this level 3 or 4 and they kind of hit a sweet spot where they're able to communicate and mask the language barrier because they're able to function socially with their friends. They're able to act like they understand, but they still really need a push and support to be able to attain fluency. A lot of English learners sort of plateau at this level, and these are the students who we often see become our long-term English learners who just sort of max out at the 4 and without an additional push of instruction may not hit that fluency mark. And this is just a comparison of our data from this year to last year's data, and you can see it's pretty similar. So we have had a lot of students exiting as fluent. Indiana just transitioned to WIDA Access in the 2014 to 2015 school year. Before that, we were using Last Links. And so we have seen a higher percentage of students exiting with WIDA. And a big part of that is that with Last Link, students were required to hit a level 5 2 consecutive years. So we saw a lot of inconsistency from one year of test taking to the next, requiring that. Whereas with WIDA Access, they only have to hit that mark one time.
And one thing that's interesting is Indiana's always had a problem with our 4s sort of clumping there and not moving to a 5. So we're actually seeing a dip in the number of 4s a little bit, loss of about 10%, and it's much higher in the terms of level 3s. So I'm not sure what that means necessarily for the data yet, but that's sort of interesting that our level 3 population is growing quite a bit. WIDA is much more accurate than Lost Links ever was, so that could be part of that.
And I did just want to mention our students who do test as fluent, who hit that level 5.0 mark, they're required to enter then a 2-year formal monitoring period where even though they're not tested with the WIDA test, and even though they may not receive English language support services directly, they are rigorously monitored to quickly identify any remaining academic or language gaps and remediate those gaps. So we're not just having them hit the 5 and saying, good luck, but giving them that continued support and sort of that transition. As you look, this shows our 2015 mean proficiency levels by domain. So the WIDA Access is actually made up of 4 separate tests of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And you can see here that across the state, our writing scores are the lowest, which is what we expect. That typically is the last area to develop and the most challenging area for our students. So we are hoping to really target our professional development and support for schools to help really work on those writing skills across the state, and that's something we've been working on the last year or so, and we'll continue moving forward. Okay, so I know most of you work with special education programming, so I'm sure you hear a lot of excuses about why services aren't provided or why your students can't do something, and this is what we hear a lot with our English learners. Well, we just can't do that for them, or they can't. With the WIDA Access the WIDA Standards framework, a big focus is on what students can do. And one of the trademark pieces of WIDA is called their CanDo philosophy, which is we look at where students are and we talk about what they can do. But we know that that means we have to kind of combat a lot of the excuses we hear from teachers, from parents, from the students themselves about what the students can't do or what obstacles are in the way. So I want to give you just a few minutes to talk. You can jot some notes or just chat with the people at your table about some of the common excuses you hear about why ELs won't or can't be given the tools they need to succeed.
And if you want extra credit, then maybe say, how can I rephrase this, or how can I take this back to my school and start the conversation where my student is and what my student can do. That's pretty powerful for students with disabilities as well as students who are English learners. Starting the conversation with what they can do and then what supports we can help them out with to grow to the next level. So maybe talk about it amongst your groups. If you would like to share out when you're done, we'll ask for a couple volunteers. Just some things you hear and sort of what you're going to do to take it to the next level. You can chat. About 3 minutes. Go for it, guys. So again, this is the model. Make sure that your ELs have time to produce the language in your classrooms. Anecdotally, we went to a school district and we timed how much the ELs were speaking in the classroom, and we counted and as time actually producing English language. And out of 30 students, there were 20 ELs, and the amount of time was 20 seconds of English learners producing English, which broke out to about 0.8 seconds per student in the room that day. So just making sure that you're increasing the amount that they get to interact with their language is helpful. So the excuses are more for your clarification, but what I really care about is there anyone here who, you shared out your excuse and then maybe you thought with your partner and you found a way to change that and make it more of a positively based discussion where you can start it off what your students can do. Anybody have a strategy they'd want to share out real quick? So for those listening at home online, she said just making sure the comment is that the conversation always starts and making sure it's person-based language in their goals, in their areas of growth. I like that. Very good. Another strategy, a way you're going to make sure you take it back to your buildings and start off on a positive note?
So we hear a lot of excuses from the field, as I'm sure you do, and what it comes down to is it's hard. It's really hard to serve English learners. There are a lot of barriers, a lot of obstacles for our kids, a lot of obstacles in the schools. There's not ever as much funding as we want, but we say, here are the excuses, and we say, so what? The kids are here, we have to meet their needs, so now what? Now what are we going to do? This is an activity we've done a lot across the state in the last year, to have teachers even write down all of those excuses and then cross them out and say, okay, so what? What are we going to do about it? And that's a powerful tool that you may consider taking back to your buildings too, to really think about, we can acknowledge all of these excuses and acknowledge that it's really hard, but what are we going to do about it? Because the kids are here and it's time to meet their needs, and there's no waiting for that. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the federal requirements for English learners, and Cole's going to take us through this.
So I got the really interesting part of the presentation to share with you today. So the federal requirements and what schools and school districts need to know about meeting the unique needs of their English learners. There we go. So this is the legalese of what an English learner really is. Essentially, it's a student who is aged 3 through 21. So if any of you in here apply for Title III or NESP, that is the age limit of someone who will generate funding. That's the federal guidelines. Now, can an English learner be older than 21, especially if you're in an adult ed program? Absolutely. However, the requirements look a little bit different, and you can give us a call and we can walk you through some of the different options for you in that way. They don't generate Title III or NESP funding, but we still would really love for them to be as part of your program. That's just, again, being student-centered and people-centered in your approach to EL instruction. So their native language also has to be a language other than English. So does anyone know in here the form that we use to measure that or decide that? The Home Language Survey, the HLS, which a lot of schools still put that in their registration packet. We're strongly recommending please don't put that in your registration packet. It should only go to a new student in kindergarten or the first year that they're enrolled in a school here in Indiana. So if it's in your registration packet, I strongly encourage you to please take that out and target it more for just kindergartners, or if a student indicates that they are moving here from Texas or Ohio. We do not honor another state's HLS form, so just making sure that we have one. because the problem is that student will transfer, and then the next school district may also have it in their packet. And then a lot of times we have students who say, well, we watched Dora over the summer, so we are going to change the language to Spanish. And then by law, that student has to be screened with the WAPT. And a lot of times that can create some dirty data, as we like to call it. And removing that language when we have to go back requires a committee at the DOE to consider each request, because taking a student's language away is considered it's a civil right that you are then taking away from that student. So you have to make sure that there are safeguards in place, that it's not changed without regard. And the last piece there that we highlighted are difficulties in the 4 language domains: speaking, writing, reading, or listening or understanding English. So those are the 3 pieces that are really the hard and fast parts of an EL. The rest is the legalese that they give us in ESEA. Now the main law, again, we gave you the legalese in case you'd like to copy that down, but it's Lau v. Nichols. And Lau is the Supreme Court case that essentially started English learning as we know it. School districts were teaching their students all the same. They were not really differentiating, not meeting the language needs of English learners. And the Supreme Court said that, equal is not necessarily the same. So you have to provide equity in different ways. So you'll hear EL people a lot say Lau requirements. Lau basically said that ELs, like all students, are entitled to Tier 1 instruction, but they're also entitled to a little bit extra. So they're entitled to an extra piece or an extra dose of English language development. So that's where, they were getting their Tier 1 like everyone else, but then what were they specifically having their needs met in English language development? That's where Lau comes in. Yes? Yes, so she asked about foreign exchange students. Foreign exchange students would be enrolled in Indiana for the first time, so you'd give them the HLS, give them the WAPT, and we'd go from there. They would either be LEP and an EL and be entitled to services, or they would be fluent and they would not be in the program. Good question. The next main law that we have to take into consideration when meeting our requirements, again, we had Lau, which is that first extra dose of English language development. Then we have Castañeda v. Pickard. Castañeda is a 3-pronged test that you have to ask yourself. 1, and it's a little small up there. 1, is my EL program based on sound educational theory and strategy? Is it research-based? 2, so something like sheltered instruction, SIOP, that's research-based, and that's scientifically, it's said there's evidence and educational background to that. That is an option for your EL programming. Rosetta Stone, however, is not research-based. It is not in the field of language acquisition for English learners, at least. And putting a student on an iPad with Rosetta Stone in the corner does not a program make. Number 2, it has to be reasonably sourced and resourced and also staffed, so your personnel. So essentially to say a large school district with 3,000 ELs and 1 EL teacher, that's a big no-no on the second prong there. It is not reasonably sourced or resourced or staffed, and that would be a large finding for civil rights on that one. There is no ratio. If that's what you're thinking, there's no set ratio of EL teacher to students. Again, when we come in, we would have to look for, is it reasonably staffed? Another question? Yes, to repeat the question. So she said, as far as staffing, do we have to have an EL teacher in our school if we don't have any ELs? I would say no, and that's part of a larger conversation in regards to certification. In Indiana right now, for an elementary school, you only have to have an elementary generalist license to teach English learning. That could be PE, unfortunately. That could be mathematics, not necessarily in the area of language acquisition. Now, we're working on an interpretation that'll be coming out. We've been interpreting that law incorrectly. So essentially, we're going to have new requirements coming out in terms of REPA and the fact that you do have to have someone trained in language acquisition if they're going to be the teacher of record, more than likely is what we're doing. Now, we're not going to come out and say, tomorrow, you need to have your teacher certified. There's more than likely going to be a couple years of a transition. We don't have anything set on the timeline just yet or the specifics of what the new regulation will look like, but that is forthcoming. So if you do have ELs and you have low numbers of certified teachers, you get to be the hero when you go back and say, hey, let's start looking into certification. We can use Title I, Title II, Title III, NESP for all that. So that could be your chance to go back and do that. For middle and high school, you do have to have certification in the years and the grades that you are teaching. So that's a longer answer to your question of, do I have to have an EL certified teacher? I would say currently no, but I would strongly encourage you to start working on that.
But that doesn't mean you have to have one teacher whose full job is EL to meet your one student who moves in their needs.
And then the last piece is, if you have a program that's research-based and scientifically sound, and then you're adequately sourcing and resourcing and staffing your program, you have to evaluate it. And you have to look at your data, you have to look at how your ELs are growing, where the pieces are not working and coming together, and then you have to change it. So in any event of federal monitoring or anything of that sort, the federal government has stated that school districts and schools, in your case, need to look at your data and look at your EL program and see where you're not moving the needle and how we can adjust the program to better meet the needs of all your students. Any questions on Lau or Castañeda? Okay. So the EL program, it is Tier 1 plus that extra piece that I was saying from Tier 1 and that Lau requirement. So it is an additional English language intervention or instruction, not intervention, and support services that are provided by a certified teacher. So that's an important piece. In Indiana, you can only deliver Lau requirements if you are certified. Again, that piece of the general education teacher in the elementary setting, they could be certified to teach EL in Indiana. We're working on those requirements again, but it cannot be an IA, an instructional assistant, coming to pick the student up and pull them out, not under the direct supervision of a teacher. That is not, an IA cannot deliver Lau, therefore, in a finding, we would say your school is not even giving Lau. Even though you say, well, they're getting pulled out and they're getting services. Yes, but it's not under the direct supervision of a teacher, and the IA may be making the lessons, for example, and it's pulled out to a separate room, so that would not be compliant on that one. So it needs to be a certified teacher or under the direct supervision of a certified teacher who is directing the instruction for all the ELs. So again, it's not Title I. Title I can play into your EL program, and we have a document that we have on our website and that we are working on updating currently to get some language on ESSA and make sure we're aligned to WIDA in there, on how you can braid Title I services with your Title III. Now, if you're school-wide, it looks much easier. If you're a targeted school, we have to be a little bit more judicious in how we do that. The important takeaway, though, is that ELs are eligible for Title I, and Title III, or any language instruction, has to come up after that. It's not optional, again. It's not only carried out by an instructional assistant, so make sure it's a certified teacher. It's not only for levels 1 through 3. It's technically for a student who is a 1.0 to a 4.9. And it's not the only support that they need, so they can also receive RTI. They are also eligible for special education, for identification. So just because they're an English learner doesn't mean, oh no, we can't double dip with Title I, or we can't do RTI with an EL, or they're not eligible for high ability or gifted. They're eligible for everything that another student would be eligible for. And if you happen to take any funding for your ELs, we all take some form of money from the state or federal government. So your core instruction, again, is what all students are allowed to have. Then there's that core EL program, that piece, that extra piece, as defined by Lau. Then if you take Title I, that's your supplemental instruction for all students. And your LEPs may be qualified for that as well. Again, it's going to look different on targeted or school-wide. Then if you accept Title III dollars, that's a supplemental piece on top of that. We'll be speaking about NESP and Title III here shortly. And then if you happen to have any migrant students, which I think are very few here in the Indianapolis area at charter schools, then that would be an extra piece. The important point is to note that the core EL program is paid for from state and local only. So you can only pay for your certified EL teacher to deliver the Lau requirements from state or local dollars. Now, Title III is not state or local, but NESP is, and so we'll get to that here in shortly. So we kind of want to know what your EL program looks like, and that's going to take us into our next topic, which Valerie will be taking over on the EL plan that every school has had to submit to us if they do not take Title III dollars. So we're running a little bit short on time, so we might speed through. We're going to go ahead and skip this activity. We're going to get right into English learning plans, okay?
But do be thinking about, what is your EL program currently? What areas do you think are maybe triggers for compliance checks that you're concerned that you may not be meeting requirements? And as Cole mentioned several times, we're happy to talk with you individually about how we can support you in your buildings. So talking about English learner plans, this is a new requirement for all LEAs. So this is all public schools and charters, but it is something that IDOE has been obligated to monitor for a very long time. We just haven't had a system in place for how we're doing this for all of our schools. So typically, our schools who apply for Title III and NESP funds, of course, have to go through us and, provide some evidence of their EL program that they have in place. But up until this point, if schools don't draw those funding sources, we don't really have any information about any EL programming or any assurances that they're meeting those federal requirements. And as a state educational agency, we are obligated to make sure that that's happening for all of our students. So,
also, under ESSA, if I can interrupt, under ESSA, the Title III accountability has always been there, the AMAOs, if that sounds familiar. ESSA has gotten rid of AMAOs and is now moving accountability under Title I, and it's going to be a part of your school grade, whether you accept Title III dollars or not. So if you have an EL, depending on the end size and how that looks, that will now be factored into your school grade. So we're rolling out the EL plan as a way to say, hey, things are getting a little bit more stringent in terms of the state accountability and federal reporting. So let's see how we can target some districts for specific help if they need it, or at least start the conversation of, I have 2 EL kiddos that I know of. How do we best meet the needs of these students? So that offers a way for you guys to ask for some technical assistance. As Valerie was saying, I'll go ahead and let you pick back up.
Yeah, so if your school does accept and apply for Title III funding, no additional action is required because the EL plan is embedded into the Title III application. And we have really tried to make this plan as user-friendly and streamlined as possible. And as I mentioned, this is just a way for us to ensure that the rights of all of our students are being upheld. This is something that should be happening already, but we're just requiring a little bit of information about what you have in place. So if your school does not accept Title III, we will be offering technical assistance to help you fill out this English Learner Plan. It's basically a 2.5-page form that just shows your LAU services that you provide to students at each level, and for elementary, middle, and high school. For some of you, you may only have to fill out one of those columns. And that will be due October 1st, 2017, and we've already shared this with leadership August 11th and have sent it out through several avenues, but we're happy to provide more information on how to access that.
Just a clarification, it's due October 1st, 2016. You can email that to myself or to Valerie. We'll have them due likely October 1st again next year, so I would imagine that will appear again. But yeah, it is due the October 1st, 2016. Even if you don't have any ELs, we do have a box there for you to check saying we have no identified ELs currently, but we do intend to make sure and that we have check boxes of all the things you have to do if you accept any federal money at all in the event that an English learner enrolls. So things such as the HLS, the IOP, ensuring that they're given the WAPT, that's essentially all it is. And you say, I promise to do that, should we have an EL enroll? And you can shoot that off to us. Some districts are saying, well, I still want to have a plan in place for when I do have one show up, and you're the teacher of record, like you were saying, so you probably are thinking, I would like to have a plan that I can put into motion day one. It's not required, but it's great if you'd like to go ahead and fill that out. We provide a template there that you can kind of plug and chug, and we also have an example of an EL plan that was submitted to the department that we use as something you can sort of model yours after. Does anyone in here take Title III? How about NESP? No one on either one? Okay. So we have 2 options here that Valerie can talk about a little bit. She'll start off.
So we touched on this a little bit already, but when we're funding EL services, the core federally required LAU services that are that first piece of ensuring EL's meaningful access to the curriculum have to be paid from local and state funds. And we'll talk about our state funding source specific to ELs in just a moment. Any federal funding, so this would specifically be Title III in this case that we typically discuss, is available to pay for supplemental instruction and support. So we always say that that's like the cherry on top for them, but it has to be in addition to all of the other programs that would be in place for all students. So our state funding stream for ELs is NESP, the non-English speaking program. The NESP grant is a 1-year annual grant awarded to public schools and charters based on their LEP student count. So the LEP, the Limited English Proficient count. So this would be your students who score at a 1.0 to a 4.9. This information is reported to the IDOE each year on the LM, the Language Minority Report. So in November. So currently our NESP for 16-17 is based on enrollment numbers from 15-16 as reported last November. And that's how we move forward.
Now, if you are a new charter school who's just opened this year, we do still want to make sure that you have funding options available to you. And you might say, well, that's great, but this is all based on numbers from last year. We weren't open and I have 30 ELs. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? Shoot me an email. We will go ahead and generate an allocation for you when we do reallocations in the spring and you've submitted your numbers to us in November. We'll make sure to go back and fund you all the way for this year to make sure that you still have access to those funds that you need for meeting the needs of your students.
Our NESP allocation for this year was $200 per pupil, and no minimum number of students is required to receive this subgrant from the state.
So if you've got one EL, you can apply for your $200 cash reimbursement form. Title III is a little bit different, and we'll speak to that requirement here shortly.
And the NESP and Title III grant applications for this year were actually due September 2nd, but if you still are interested in applying, we're happy to work with you on extending that deadline, and we would want to do that as quickly as possible so you have access to those funds. So again, Title III is the federal funding source for ELs, and we can't emphasize enough, it's supplementary. It has to supplement your core EL programs. So this could be like after-school tutoring that you have available in addition to your core LAU program that happens during the school day. It's one example. Title III is a 27-month grant cycle, but we have new allocations awarded each school year. For Title III, there is a minimum of a $10,000 allocation required to receive a subgrant from the state, so that usually comes out to about 65 EL students. But if you have a lower number of students and therefore a lower allocation, you can apply jointly as a consortium to hit that $10,000 minimum mark. And we won't go into all the nitty-gritty details of that, but we'd be happy to offer support on that and help connect you with some of the consortia that apply.
You may not have the 10,000, but if you and another charter school and another charter school may have that 10,000, we can work with you on who'd like to be the fiscal agent, who'd like to be in charge, and then how we can move forward with a consortium grant on that one.
So just looking at it, the difference, here's a snapshot here for you of the things that would be able to be funded with NESP and Title III. NESP as a state funding source has a lot more flexibility. It can be used to provide your LAU services. It can be used to pay for other federal requirements, such as the costs associated with testing. So paying for headsets for the WIDA access testing would be allowable under NESP. It would not be allowable under Title III because that's a federal requirement that you have to do, so that's not considered supplemental. And you can see some of these other things. I won't read all of them for you. Translation for example, for a case conference would have to be paid from state funding. Could not use Title III funding for that because, again, it's not optional, it's not supplemental, it's something required federally. And then you can see under Title III several of our suggestions. Outreach night for parents, NESP or Title III could be used to pay for E&L certification for professional development. So that's something we're really encouraging people to use their funds for that. As Cole mentioned, we're moving towards more stringent licensure requirements for instruction for our ELs. So that's a snapshot of that. I know the PowerPoints will be shared with you later, so you'll have that resource to go back to.
And if you decide to move forward with funding, if you want to shoot us an email and say, hey, is this an acceptable form for this NESP? We could say yes or no, or we can even be creative and say, let's move this from your Title III app into your NESP, and let's move NESP over to your Title III because you had those a little bit backwards. We're happy to work with you all. So it's about 11:24, and I want to have about the last 15 minutes or so for questions, if you happen to have any. So we're going to briefly touch on WIDA and some resources for you all. WIDA stands for World Class Instructional Design and Assessment. If you don't work with WIDA directly, it sort of just seems like this monolith that a lot of people, their eyes just glaze over once you start talking about WIDA. I understand. So WIDA is a consortium of 38 states that we work with, and they offer the access test. So they write access for ELLs, and then WIDA also offers a framework of standards. They also do the CanDo descriptors, and they do model performance indicators, which are sort of every lesson, everything you walk in with, what language, what content, and what support am I offering. They offer a lot of supports in that way for teachers and administrators. They also offer us here at the state a bucket of PD time that we offer for any public school that would like to apply. We had a survey earlier this year for you to indicate which trainings you'd like to go to. So WIDA really is a big umbrella option. They're not just the test, they're quite a few different things. So the 5 standards, again, we said every teacher is a language teacher, which means if you're a math teacher, you're teaching the language of mathematics. Science, you're teaching the language of science. Before, Indiana had literally just about 3 or 4 standards to every Indiana standard for ELs. So you had your Indiana academic standard, and then you had 3 or 4 EL standards underneath. I printed it off my first year teaching. It was an unwieldy document. So when we had these 5, that was a lot better. It is aligned to our college and career ready standards. So WIDA is, they go together very well. They're sort of the bridge from Indiana college and career ready standards to English language development and how we make that happen. So Valerie touched on the CanDo descriptors. Essentially, these are all available on WIDA's website. We can also direct you to those if you need. And it stakes you from each level. So level 1 student, instead of telling me what he or she cannot do, let's start with what they should be able to do at that level of language proficiency. So level 1 should be able to, and I know it's blurry for you, it's even blurrier for me, should be able to point to standardized pictures, words, or phrases. Stated words, pictures, or phrases, and they're also level, unique, and also grade span specific. So 3 to 5, 3rd to 5th grade, kindergarten, 1st to 2nd, etc. So it'll be specific in a way for your teachers, a quick introduction to WIDA and say, here's where your student should be. Now, what sort of supports can we give them to push them to the next level? And it starts you, again, that person-based language, where the student is, and then how we can move them there. Mm-hmm. We have some resources. This is available on our website, the WIDA Resource Guide. Provides several links where you can go to for trainings. If you're not on Title III and NESP on Learning Connection, please do sign up. I know we've got a plug for that later on in the presentation here. That's where we'll be putting out a lot of, it's September. What should you be doing to get ready for WIDA Access? It's October. What should you have been doing with your technology advisor to make sure you have all the correct stuff for testing this spring? We'll be rolling out updates such as that on there. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so for this year, our Indiana WIDA Access testing window is from January 9th to February 24th. That is the only time that you can give the WIDA Access assessment. That is a 6-week window, so we allowed you plenty of time, and we encourage you start testing January 9th. If you can, start the very first day. So don't wait until the last minute. If you test at the beginning, that gives you plenty of time if you end up needing to order additional materials. If we have another polar vortex and school is closed for 3 weeks, you still have 3 more weeks to get all of your kids tested. And then there are updated certification requirements for all test administrators this year for WIDA. And so we are requiring that all test administrators and test coordinators recertify on the WIDA website this year. If you've done any of the testing, this may be something you're familiar with. So if you are giving the Access 2.0 test, the kindergarten test, or the alternate assessment for students with disabilities, you will need to go through the training online. Those trainings are partially available now. We're waiting for WIDA to release the fully revamped modules. I think this week they're going to be out. And those just have to be completed before the test window opens. And all access testing does have to be administered by a certified teacher, a teacher with a valid license or school services license or administrator license.
And WIDA heard feedback from the field and said, if you remember, who in here has been certified on their checklists? Okay, so they got rid of that check mark. Please read this 300 to 400 page document. They've gotten rid of that, and it's much more module based now, pre-test, during test, and after test. So what you as the test administrator would need to know. So it's completely changed their training, thank goodness. I can hear your sigh of relief, mine too. So go ahead and make sure that you are certified. If you are not, it might be a good thing to ask your principal or your Title III or EL coordinator, if you have one, saying, hey, if you need me to help out, I'm certified, I'd be happy to help out with this one. And you can go to our website there, that is WIDA. If you click this map where all the states are highlighted, those are all the states that are in the consortium and that give the access test. So if you're saying, hey, I have a kid from Florida, he should have WIDA scores. We can talk about the specific requirements for those, what you can do with scores from another state. You can go on there and click and find out if that state is a member of the consortium. If you click on Indiana, our contact info will also pop up. So you can find us on the DOE website. You can also find us on WIDA's website. So as we are the English Learning and Migrant Education Office, we also have the Migrant Work Survey, which, just a reminder, if you have a student who you think may be a migrant, please do reach out to us first and foremost. But we also have the Migrant Work Survey, which is to be given to every student in the state of Indiana when they enroll. Now, this you can have in your enrollment packet. Essentially, the federal guidance says you are only a migrant student if you moved school districts with the intent of finding agricultural work. So in other words, you pretty much have to sit down with that person and have an interview to determine their intent. You can't really find that on a piece of paper. So there are 3 screening questions there. They essentially ask, have you moved for this reason, or this reason? If no, you just fill out your name and address, and then if there's a stop sign, and that's all you have to fill out. You don't have to go through and fill out the whole form. If you do have someone who fills out the whole form and it looks like they've moved for agricultural purposes, please do call the numbers on that paper. You can call me, and I will have one of our migrant recruiters come to your school and interview the student to see if they do qualify. Yes?
And you're saying student, but are we interviewing the family or are we interviewing the student?
It's a good catch. So every student needs to have one on file, but we would interview the parents because the parents often move for that purpose. So we would try to determine with the parents and the students that moved with them who would then qualify for migrant support. And then we have some additional resources for you here. The U.S. Department of Education put out an EL toolkit. It's great. It has 10 chapters, and it runs anywhere from identifying ELs to what does adequate sourcing look like, how do I schedule my students and put them in classes in the least segregative manner, so how do I make sure I'm not violating their civil rights by keeping them in an EL-only class for all of eternity and they have no contact with native English-speaking peers, all the way to exiting and opting out. I have a parent who said they don't want E&L services. What do I do? It's all covered in there. It's also covered in our guidebook as well on our website. So that's a good option for you if you're seeing how to build an EL program from the ground up. That's a great option for you to start there.
When someone calls and tells me I'm the special education teacher of record and someone just told me now I have EL, this is the first place we send them. So if that were to apply to anyone else in the room.
All right, so it's 11:32. We have you till about 11:45. Any questions? We've covered a lot. There's a lot that goes on with EL. This was sort of a high altitude view. Any questions that we can answer for you while we're here? While you may be thinking of a question, I'll get in a plug. You're all special education professionals. I would encourage you, you actually have a unique spot since you are in both worlds, to make sure that you advocate for yourselves and your students. If you have a student who is dual identified, make sure that you are on the ILP committee helping decide the ILP for the language needs of the student. Make sure that you have an EL professional in your IEP committee, looking at how do we make sure we can both meet the needs of the student. Again, we're student-centered. It's not about the adults, it's about the students, so how do we best meet their needs? One does not trump the other one in any sense or any legality. They're both equal protectors of our students and any rights that they need to make sure are ensured in the classroom. So I want to make sure you guys all feel empowered to advocate for yourselves and say, hey, I'd like to be on the ILP committee. If we don't have any ELs, I'd like to make sure I'm in the room to help make sure there are decisions made that will meet the needs of all our students. So she asked if we do have a new EL, how do we get them enrolled in the WIDA program, and how do we make sure they're basically on the board for WIDA access testing, etc. So the first thing you're going to do is you'll have the HLS administered. I am assuming that then you've given the WAPT, so you've screened them and they test a 1.0 to a 4.9, which means they're an English learner. Then at that point, depending on where you are in the window, we have 2 reporting windows that are very important for ELs. So the first one is coming up here in October, and that's the TL, the testing label data collection. So if you talk to your test coordinator, your corporation test coordinator, or your data research head, whoever that may be for your school, you'll say, hey, there is a testing label report that we need to give to the state. And that's where you can indicate all of your ELs. It will generate a label for you for your WIDA booklets, so you don't have to type those out or hand print them. I remember the days of bubbling, and that was not fun. So making sure that you can do that. And then on November 1st, we are opening up the LM, which, as Valerie stated, was the Language Minority Data Collection. And that's where you'll actually go in and say this student is a 2.0 measured by the WAPT, and these are the accommodations. At that point, then, they will generate funding for you the next school year. And also the TL will make sure that they are in WIDA's system. Now, of course, there's always a fallback. You get a student on January, it'd be 6th or 7th. What do I do? You can go into the WIDA AMS, which is where the test platform is located, and you can add your student in if they were to join last minute. So there's no worry about getting that. It is an online test exclusively. Grades 1 through 5 look a little bit different. They're part online, part paper, pencil. But you can go on in and add those students and make a test ticket for them at any point in time. Yes? So she asked if this was a requirement for only schools that take Title I funding. It'd be for any school that accepts federal dollars in general. And if you haven't done it, that's okay. You can just go ahead and give one to each student. We have in English and Spanish. And if you have any questions, give me a call or give Mina. She is our migrant specialist a call, and we'd be happy to walk you through that process.
I am going to go ahead and put our contact info slide up here, but please, if you have more questions, keep sharing.
Yes. So WIDA alternate assessment, every student by federal law has to be tested with WIDA access. So any student who's identified as an EL must be given WIDA. Fun fact, our rate this last year was only 88%. So we're going to make sure that we are tracking that to ensure that all of our ELs are following federal guidance and getting tested. Now, about 1% of our population is supposed to take I-STAR or an alternate assessment. About 1% of your EL population, it holds then, would take alternate access, which is for students with severe cognitive disabilities who may not be able to take the full access test. That is an alternate assessment available to them. Now, a quick note, if you have a student who is on the alternate access track, it is our recommendation that if they score high enough, the IEP and ILP committees have an option to say we would like them to take the access test rather than the alternate. I say that caveat because the federal government, despite our very strongly worded recommendations and requests and imploring them to do this, they are standing firm in the fact that a student who takes alternate can never test out of EL status. So if you have a student who has severe cognitive disabilities, has demonstrated proficiency in the highest manner possible for the test that we say we give them, Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights are saying, nope, they cannot be exited. So just a note that the IEP and ILP committees have some flexibility there to decide whatever you think will best show your student's proficiency. We would like you to be able to do that. So there is the alternate exam. It is paper pencil. It is not online. So about 1% of your students may qualify for that, and that is decided by the IEP and ILP committees. Again, if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to talk to you, but just know that they can't officially exit, and they aren't given a score 1.0 to 4.9. They're given an A, 1, 2, or 3, and a P, 1, 2, or 3. And again, they won't be able to exit, but please do take that into consideration. So IEP accommodations always are allowed on WIDA access or on the ALT or in the WAPT. However, ILP accommodations would not be appropriate since this is a language test to measure their English proficiency. They don't get those accommodations for language necessarily on the WIDA access, but the IEP accommodations are still valid and are to be followed on WIDA access. Good question.
And just to note, there is no alternate assessment right now for kindergarten, and there is no alternate version of the WIDA placement test. Now, both of those assessments are administered one-on-one and sort of a paper pencil format, and have a system for ending the test if a student is unable to answer. It's 2 in a row. If they miss 2 basically, or have no response for 2 questions, then you just continue and move to the next section. But there is no alternate assessment for them.